morning, everybody. I'm thrilled once again to be here with this congregation, and I trust that you all had a very good Christmas week. Pastor David posted on Facebook that I'm an extended family member of this church, and I am truly delighted to have that designation. However, the reality is that I'm an ordained minister in the United Church of Canada. So this morning I want to talk to you a bit about the United Church of Canada, and then talk about the main issue of the church during the time when I was in theology school. I attended Queen's University School of Theology from 1991 to 1995, and I received my Master's of Divinity, and I was ordained in May of 1995. The United Church of Canada is a progressive Protestant church, and it is the largest Protestant church in Canada, with 3 million members and 3,000 congregations. On June 10th, 1925, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, the Congregationalists, 70% of the Presbyterians, as well as the General Council of Union Churches, which were in Western Canada, joined and came together to form the United Church of Canada. Others joined in during the next decade, and the last group to join was the Evangelical United Brethren, who joined the United Church of Canada in 1968. The United Church of Canada is a very progressive church. We ordained the first woman in 1936. The moderator of our church could be compared to the Anglican primate, perhaps. He or she is the leader of the head of the national church. We elected our first woman moderator in 1980. We elected our first Native Indian moderator in 92, our first non-white moderator, he was from Korea, in 98, and the first gay moderator in 2012. The main issue of the church during the time that I was in theology school was called residential schools. In the early years of the church, the government adopted what they called the National Policy of Assimilation. The intention was to get rid of the native people and teach natives to be white. It was an evil quest, and nobody questioned it. The Roman Catholic Church and the Anglican Church had the largest numbers of schools, and from the Methodist and Presbyterians' perspective, they had passion about education, and so the churches were easily co-opted into the new system that was aimed at obliterating everything that was native. Because of the isolation of many of the communities in the northern parts of Canada, the government built what they called residential schools. They went into communities and they took the children. They took them without permission from their parents. They took them south, and then they separated the boys from the girls. They separated the older sisters from the younger sisters and the older brothers from the younger brothers. There's nothing like an institution with lots of children who are considered as animals and are vulnerable to invite pedophiles and other perverts to join in. The number of schools peaked in 1931 with 80 schools. And for a long, long time, there were no voices speaking out against this gross injustice. It was not until 1947 that the Board of Home Mission of the United Church of Canada made a presentation to the government of the day asking them to replace the residential schools with day schools. The government did not respond. Fast forward to the 1960s, and slowly we were beginning to hear stories. The United Church of Canada shut down its last school in 1969, and we were the first church to do that. Finally, in 1991, a task group was formed to study the problem. This is when all the stories of the physical and sexual abuse became public. The residential schools destroyed family structures, language was lost, self-identity lost, and a whole generation of children lost to their families. And during my time at Queen's University, this issue exploded, and things began to happen. In 1986, just before I went to theology school, the Right Reverend Bob Smith, who was the moderator of the church at the time, publicly offered an apology. It was a well-written apology that was given at a worship service in Sudbury, Ontario. The Native community said thanks but saying sorry is not enough. So basically put your money where your mouth is. In 1994, the Healing Fund was established, $1 million over the next 5 years. The other thing that happened was a process of educating congregations was put into place. That fund now continues and offers $300,000 a year to help Native communities. At every single meeting I was at during that time, the hat was being passed. Native communities could apply for the money and use that money to do healing work in the communities that were suffering. In 1997, just after I was ordained, the General Council of the Church committed itself to a journey of repentance in relation to our role in the residential school system. I was at that meeting, and after all the talking, this meeting lasted a week, after all the talking, a man called Billy stood up to a microphone. He had missing teeth. He was dressed in a way that indicated poverty. He had grown up in a residential school. He thanked the moderator of that time, and then he asked if he could give her a hug. She agreed, and he slowly walked up the steps to the stage. He threw his arms around Marion, who was the moderator at the time, and they hugged. 600 delegates sat in silence, and tears were shed. It was the start of something that continues to this day. This was and is a huge black mark in the history of the church that I love. We continue to work for justice.
Thank you, Deborah. Steve?
I wasn't sure what I was going to say, but Bob, when you were talking, for me, I think the future of the church is interfaith, and I came to the church from a place that was very much the opposite of that. When I started being involved in church, I was in a youth group in New Jersey at a Missouri Synod church, very strict. Only I didn't know it at the time. I of course, thought we were very progressive. So my first year in college at BU, I got to the on-campus Lutheran service, and there was a woman there. And I was like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm looking for the Lutheran service. And she's like, no, it's here. And I kind of thought, well, that's weird. I didn't know that Lutherans had female pastors. And it turned out she was an intern from Harvard Divinity School. So in my time at BU, I stayed. She tells me to this day she did not think I was going to stay. She thought that would be my first and only meeting. But I did, and I loved it. And I started to picture something different for myself. I think growing up, my mom had been Catholic, and I never pictured being the pastor. It just wasn't something that I could imagine for myself. But I wanted to figure out a way to do ministry that was suitable to me. So I never thought that I'd be doing it in the public schools, and I know that's strange, but I do consider the public schools to be a form of ministry for me. One of the reasons I went back to continue my studies at Episcopal Divinity School was, one, the Lutheran seminaries were way too far away, and we couldn't move, and two, they're really progressive in their thinking about different faiths. And one of the things that I'm doing is I'm trying to get kids from different faith traditions to do community service together. I think it's really important. I think a lot of us are doing the same things, but separately. And I think what could it look like, or imagine what would it look like for kids who are very strong in their faith to work together to do something. A habitat, 2 kitchens, doesn't matter what. So I teach a theology class in the public schools, and what I'm trying to do is get a service learning curriculum in there. So theology, service together. And I found that Episcopal Divinity School is a great place to do that. My course next semester is on prophetic voices in Islam and Christianity. And I'm looking forward to figuring out what I can do to integrate different faiths that I'm not that familiar with into our curriculum. So for me, when Bob was talking about